yourselves. In other words, it's not about you. It's God's gift. God's standing out, reaching out with salvation. And really, that includes everything that God has. That not only includes being rescued out of our former situation, but that also means that implied in the Greek word there is the idea of wholeness and healing and deliverance. And everything that God has for mankind is implied in that word salvation. But whether we enjoy it or not depends on whether we believe it. And reach out and say, okay, God, I believe you've got that for me, and I believe I receive it. Did you know when Jesus was teaching on prayer, here's what He said. In Mark chapter 11, verse 24, Jesus said, therefore I say unto you, what things soever you desire when you pray, believe you receive them, and you shall have them. See, that's how simple He made it. In other words, He's presenting the picture that God is standing there holding out to you everything you need. And when you pray, believe you receive, and you shall have. See, He tells us, He's encouraging us to believe that we receive from God what He's got. Well, He's saying here, salvation, which includes everything God has, is a gift of grace, and it's through faith. That's all that we have to do with it. And it's not of works, lest any man should boast. Let me show you an illustration of this today. And maybe a couple of illustrations. Let's look at one in Luke's Gospel, chapter 18. You see, when we talk about not of yourselves, it's not about you. We're saying that the Christian life is not about how good you can be. It's about how good Jesus is. It's not about you trusting in what you can do. It's about trusting in what Jesus has done for you. It's not about you trying to make yourself good enough for God. It's just simply trusting in Jesus. Here's an illustration that Jesus gave of this very point. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 18, verse 9. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you what verse, Elliot. Luke chapter 18, verse 9. Jesus is talking. He spoke this parable unto certain, notice what it says, unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Now, He's talking about people, he says, and they're Pharisees, by the way, the religious people of His day. He said they trusted in themselves that they were righteous. And you know, when I talk like this about grace and about God's gift of salvation, the only people who don't like it are people who think they're already good enough and everybody else is not. If you can just get as good as me, then you have everything God. You know, we got to pay the price. You know, you got to meet the requirements. You know, again, I don't mean to pick on people who have, you know, brought things up, but I think, you know, they bring up questions. I think it might be in other people's minds. Right here, again, in this very church, right at the back of the building, a man was disappointed. This is several years ago. This man didn't like what I had to say, and he said to me, well, I believe you've got to pay the price. I believe you've got to meet the requirements before you can have anything from God. And I said, well, I agree with you to a point. I agree that somebody's got to meet the requirements. But the difference between me and you is I'm a Christian, and I believe Jesus met the requirements. See, I'm not trusting in myself. I'm trusting in Jesus. See, that's what a Christian is, somebody who trusts in Jesus. Now, if you're going to trust in yourself, that's not a Christian. You're not trusting in Jesus. And so Jesus spoke a parable here to those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Notice what He said, verse 10. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee, the other a publican. A Pharisee that was a class of people who were the strictest observers of the law of Moses. The publicans were the tax collectors. These were the down and outers. These were the lowest person in the lowest rung of the ladder in society in that day. These were the people, the most notorious sinners that everybody looked down on. The reason was they were collaborating with the Romans. They were considered to be traitors. They were taking up the taxes for the Romans. So, one was a Pharisee and one was a publican. One was a really holy guy, the Pharisee. One was a sinner, the publican. Verse 11. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. I think this is kind of funny in a way. Look at how Jesus said it. He prayed with himself. He's trusting in himself. He's even praying with himself. And I guess God's just off here at a distance observing. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. God, I thank Thee. I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even as this publican over here. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. Now, did you notice before we go to the publican, how many times did this man say I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did you notice Jesus said He spoke this parable to those who trust in themselves that they are righteous? And His prayer, did you notice His prayer is all about me? Right? I I thank you. I'm not like other men. I'm not like that guy over there, the sinner. I do this and I do that. And the things that he did, they're not bad things. But you see, what he's trusting in is himself. Remember all the verses we just read. It's not about you. It's not about your works. Salvation is a gift of God. And Jesus presents this little story here of a man who did some good things and he's trusting in all of his good works. And he thinks that he's got God's approval because of all of his good works. Verse 13, on the other hand, the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God be merciful to me, a sinner. Now this man didn't have anything to boast about. He didn't have any good works. He didn't have any things that he thought commended him to God. And so he came based on God's mercy. And he said, be merciful to me, a sinner. Jesus said, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified. The word justified means made right with God. Rather than the other. For everyone that exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. He said this man who didn't have anything to boast about is the one who went home proved by God. Because he came without boasting about himself, without saying, look at what I did. See, it's not about you. That's the point. Let me give you another illustration from the Gospels that makes this same point. In Matthew's Gospel, chapter 20. This is a story I haven't read for a long, long time, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to read it again. I kind of like this story. Matthew chapter 20, beginning with verse 1. We're talking about the grace of God means it's not about you. It's about Him. Christian life is not about you. It's all about Him. And what our role is to believe in Him and to trust in Him. And then everything we do from that posture of believing in Him and trusting in Him, it's Him working in us and Him working through us. We are His workmanship. But it's not about you and what you've done to get God's approval. It's just about Him and His mercy. Matthew chapter 20, verse 1. Here's a little story from Jesus. For the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man that is a householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them to his vineyard. That was back in the good old days when you could, before the days of inflation, work all day for a penny. There's been a little bit of changes since then. I don't think you could go hire anybody to work for a penny today. Maybe your kids. Even our kids wouldn't work for a penny, would you, Elliot? No, he's shaking his head. And he went out at the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said unto them, Go you also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. And he went out and did about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and said unto them, Why do you stand here all day idle? They said unto him, Because no man has hired us. He said, Go into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right you shall receive. So when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard said to his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning at the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired at the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. And when they had received it, they murmured against the good man of the house. Now why did they murmur against the good? Why were they complaining against the man who was paying them? It's because they thought, because they had more works to their credit, they should have been more favored. They thought they were better than everybody else because they had been there. They had more works to show for it. Verse 12, say, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made us equal. Thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden in the heat of the day. He said, You made us all equal. And see, the thing about the message of grace is, the people don't like it, it makes everyone equal because we all come the same way. We all have to come and trust in Jesus because it's not about you. It's about Him. For me, I think that's good news. I think that's good. Anyway, he says, You've made us equal to them, which have borne the burden in the heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? He said, Are you mad at me? Are you criticizing me because I'm good? In other words, isn't it okay for me to do with what's mine just as I please? And so what this parable is about, what has happened in this story? God gave the parable is the master of the vineyard gave everybody the same thing no matter how much they worked.